We could just take our seats. We'll be starting in a couple of seconds. Okay, I think we're ready to go. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our quarterly economic survey results for quarter four. I need to eventually catch up with me one day. My name's Chris Fletcher. I'm the policy director and the lead on the Greater Manchester Local Skills Improvement Plan, and I'll be hosting today's event. In a minute, I'm going to hand over to Subri, who'll take you through the main part of the presentation. I'd like to welcome Jane Garner and Jill Bottomley, who are joining us on our panel a little bit later on. We'll be taking a little bit more of a look around skills and recruitment issues, something that obviously we're really focusing on at the present moment in time here in the Chamber, and of course one of those issues that a lot of people out there, especially SMEs, still continue to have problems with. We are live streaming this event, but it's great to see so many of you here in person today, and the room will get a little bit warmer as we go through. I've just noticed the make of this mic is sub-zero, so I thought that's quite appropriate. But we will get there, and hopefully we'll be aware for just after 10 o'clock, and you'll have a really good idea over what's currently going on, both in Greater Manchester and the wider economy itself. The only thing I just want to add here is that I was going to start off by saying we've done it. We've managed to get through a full quarter without a change in government, but I was wrong. We missed it by about a month. So I think this is the third different government that we've had this year in the last three QES presentations. I'm not going to say anything about that. Make of that what you will. I'll now hand over to Subri to take you through the results and start to give us an idea over what's actually going on in the local economy. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's very nice to see so many of you here. You have braved the train strikes, the weather, etc. So, and it's absolutely wonderful that you have come for your dose of Christmas cheer this morning. Okay, and I shall make sure that I give you as much as possible, because the economy and the politics at the moment are the gifts that keep on giving, aren't they? Okay, so for those of you who have attended the QES before, this is just a revision. I shall ask questions later. But for those of you who are attending for the first time, just a little bit on what the quarterly economic survey is. It's a business confidence or a business sentiment survey. It has been going on for many years. The first time we ran it was in 1989. I think it was in 1989. So we've asked the same questions in all the quarters since then. So we have a very good view of what is happening in the local economy. What we do in GM Chamber is we administer the survey for Greater Manchester, but we are also the Northwest coordinators. So the other 8 chambers in the Northwest either send us their results, or in some cases we run it on their behalf. So we have the Northwest view to this as well. What I then do is compile the results, send it over to the British chambers, who produce the national results. So we do get a view of the national results. But the interesting thing about the QES is that the field work is conducted in a quarter, the analysis is done, and the results published in the same quarter. That allows us to be way ahead of the national data set releases. So we are ahead of the curve, and we can get a forward view of what's going to come in the next few weeks and months. It's a representative survey, and do remember, what I'm going to tell you today is what you have told me, in the survey. I haven't made anything up. It's all based on data that you have given us. All I'm doing is sort of analyze it and give it back with some added commentary and context. So that's all I'm doing. And because so many of you respond to the survey, it makes the survey representative. Nationally, we had about 6,000 responses this quarter. In Greater Manchester, we usually get between 300 and 350, and it was 324 this quarter. So again, a sizable sample. And being first matters because A, it gives us that forward view, and it can actually either prove or disprove national data releases that will come later. And because of all of these reasons, policymakers in various bodies do use the QES results. And in fact, it is one of the inputs into the Monetary Policy Committee when they set interest rates. So tomorrow, they will have access to the last quarter's QES results and the MPC meets. And we obviously brief them every quarter about what the business pressures are. So this morning, just a little bit of overview of the current macroeconomic situation. The other interesting thing we do, and many of you will know this, is to produce the Greater Manchester Index. And that's a composite economic indicator based on 7 different QES measures. It's one number that gives you a view of where the GM economy is at any point in time. We look at domestic demand, overseas demand, cash positions, business investment, confidence, some labor market data, including the release that came from the ONS yesterday, inflation, which came out this morning, and also some early findings from the local skills improvement plan, which is the big project that the chamber is leading on here in GM. And so what is the Greater Manchester Index? It's, as I said, a composite economic indicator. It's made up of these 7 QES measures: domestic sales orders, export sales orders, business confidence in turnover and profitability, and then finally capacity utilization. And all of these are important macroeconomic indicators. So that's the intro. Let's get into the QES results now. And the headline is actually good, because the Greater Manchester Index improved by just over 4 points from the previous quarter. So it was 13.5 in the third quarter of 2022. It is now 17.8. So that is certainly a little bit of an improvement, and that may not necessarily be what you expected to hear. Now, that improvement was primarily because of services, an improvement in the services sector, and also in construction. So the construction businesses amongst you may be happy, but I don't know what your forward view is looking like. So the Greater Manchester Index has improved primarily as a consequence of improvement in services and construction. And we do have the sectoral breakdown, which I'll come to later. However, in the third quarter of 2022, UK GDP shrank by about 0.2%, and it is expected to decline again in the current quarter. We do have some economic forecasts later in the slides. But in the month of October, UK GDP grew by 0.5%, but that was after a 0.6% decline in September. So you do have that low base effect, which will give you a higher percentage. But having said that, here is the difficult news. The economy in October 2022 was roughly the same size as it was in October 2019. And if we compare pre-pandemic levels, just before the pandemic, so January 2020, we are actually slightly smaller now. And it's one of the few advanced economies which is now smaller than it was before the pandemic. And that's something we have to be concerned about. The UK does have some unique challenges. So monthly GDP did increase by 0.5% between September and October. Services output was fairly flat, I would think, minus 0.1%, within the margin of error perhaps. Manufacturing is where the difficulties are, and that declined by 1.8% in October. Construction output actually grew by 1.1%, and we have seen a healthy new order book in construction. Now, some of those findings are confirmed by other data sets, national data sets, but also the PMI indicators, the purchase managers indicators, which some of you will be aware of. That showed that services were stable between October and November. Manufacturing was the weakest performing sector, and construction is the best performing sector at the moment. Okay, so again, this is the point that I'm trying to make. From the QES results for Greater Manchester, we actually get an excellent view of not just what is happening in GM, but also across the UK. And that's because GM is a fairly big economically active area. 70 billion, 71 billion in gross value add every year. It is a sizable economy, 1.35 million in workforce. And because the representation of businesses, so roughly 82% services, about 7% manufacturing, and then construction and the others making up the remaining 11%, it's representative of the national economy as well. So whatever takeaways you have from the QES, you can be fairly confident that it is representative of what's happening elsewhere in the UK as well. Okay, so the PMI indicators and the national data releases do confirm what we have found in the QES results. The Greater Manchester Index also corresponds with quarterly GDP growth. And what we saw in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic was that GDP started growing. The Greater Manchester Index was slowly going up. It was flatlining for about 5 quarters between the second quarter of 2021 and the second quarter of 2022. And we started seeing GDP weaken in that period. And then it has started going down now. So in the last quarter, the Greater Manchester Index did decline substantially by about 18 points. So there's a slight increase this quarter because of services and construction. Okay. So what are our key demand indicators telling us? Now, on domestic demand, we have had an improvement on both of those measures. Current quarterly sales, represented by the domestic sales line, the green line there, and also advance orders. So order books for the next few months, both of those have shown across the board a slight increase. And the quarterly sales picture is looking really good. And we will dissect that when we look at the sectoral picture. But that is also in sharp contrast to the overseas trade scenario. And international trade has not recovered since COVID. Businesses still face very high shipping costs. So the internationally active businesses, you will know this, no doubt. Very high shipping costs, significant supply chain disruptions, and in the UK, the consequences of Brexit. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what your views on Brexit are, but it was an act of self-harm. The economic consequences of Brexit are starting to show at the moment, particularly on international trade. Okay, the weakening in the currency. We just had that sudden sharp weakening in the aftermath of the mini budget. But if we look at the average of the exchange rates between, say, 2017, 2018, and now, the pound was trading at 1.4 US dollars in 2018. It's now 1.2. It was trading at about 1.3 euros. It's now 1.15, 1.16. So, we have had that long-term weakening in the value of the sterling. And that's not helping. That's what is causing this imported inflation issue. But then the difficulties associated with Brexit have had a significant dampening effect on international trade. And the internationally active businesses amongst you will know this, no doubt. So let's look at that same data with a sectoral lens. And as I was saying earlier, it is services and construction that have actually contributed to that quarterly increase. And within services, what I have seen is that the professional services, the accounting firms, the legal firms, the IT services, etc. So what you would deem to be business-to-business activity, that seems to be stable. We haven't seen significant growth, but it seems to be stable. However, the improvement in this quarter is predominantly B2C. And that will come as no surprise to you because we expect hospitality spend to increase in the lead up to the festive season. We have had a reasonably good World Cup. That obviously leads to increased patronage in pubs, bars, etc. Contributes to the economy. And, all of the other kind of service level activity, primarily led by B2C, wholesale, retail, and hospitality those are the sectors that have contributed to the service sector growth in this quarter. But that is not to discount B2B. B2B is fairly stable, and we haven't seen any decline in B2B, which is also good news. Construction is actually quite interesting, and it's a volatile sector, as you will know. However, since COVID, we have seen the construction sector actually be a little bit volatile. We have seen quarters in which there have been a 25% increase in activity, but there are other quarters in which there have been a 15% drop in activity. But in the most recent quarter, looking at the new orders data across the board, 6.5% increase in new orders in the latest quarter for which we have data for. But that is primarily led by housing and what is called private industrial, so factories, warehouses, etc. And we see two sectors lagging behind. One is private commercial, and I would like your views on this, and the other is public non-residential. What ONS calls public non-residential is primarily our social infrastructure, like schools, hospitals, care homes, etc. That sector or subsector within construction seems to be lagging behind. Is that something that is true? Yeah, sure. Okay. So we do have confirmation that that is exactly what we are seeing in the market at the moment. And infrastructure is not, the pipeline for infrastructure doesn't seem to be as high as it was, say, 12, 15 months ago. Manufacturing is where the challenges are, though. And as the national data set showed, there was a decrease in manufacturing in the 3 months leading up to October. There seems to be a lot of stress in the manufacturing sector, and the long-term picture, about 12, 15 months picture, seems to be one of reduction. And so when I asked this question before about, will the post-pandemic world see a lot of nearshoring or onshoring of manufacturing activity, because that was something we saw during the pandemic. And my response is often no. I think it is actually quite difficult to achieve that level of onshoring or nearshoring for a couple of reasons. One, productive capacity that we have in the UK. The significant increase in manufacturing activity that took place immediately after the pandemic was because productive capacity was redirected. We had alcohol beverages manufacturers. They were diverting productive capacity to producing hand sanitizers or cleaning products. And we also had producers of plastic or fabric, etc., divert to PPE, face masks, and things like that. So that increased a huge contribution to the manufacturing sector growth in that period. But once they redirect back to their original activities, then we do not have lots of spare economic capacity that we can direct to this. So that again is a cause of concern for the manufacturing sector. And the picture is very similar when we look at domestic orders. Construction, as I said, new orders have gone up by 6.5%. So the construction businesses amongst you are saying that that's exactly what is happening in GM as well. And then services spend, matches what's happening elsewhere in the economy. And let's look at that demand data using a regional lens now. So this is not broken down by sectors. It's now broken down by region within Greater Manchester. Now, what I can't do, I need more responses to be able to do this, is to break the data down by local authority. And if we had enough responses, I could actually give you the Bolton picture and the Salford picture and the Manchester picture, etc. So at the moment, as the responses stand, we do get 1/3 of our responses from Manchester-based businesses. So we do get the Manchester view. So GM Central is just Manchester City. Okay. GM North is an aggregation of the 5 local authorities in the northern part, so Wigan, Bolton, Bury, Oldham, Rochdale. And then GM South is Salford, Trafford, Tameside, and Stockport. Okay. So I aggregate the responses by those 3 sub-regions. And then when we look at the data, what we have seen is that there is a reversal in GM South and GM North in this quarter. But actually, GM Central has gone down. And that seems counterintuitive, because when we see a significant increase in B2C activity, retail, hospitality, etc., we would expect Manchester to benefit, but not necessarily other areas. And I think what may have happened is that hospitality spend has been redirected towards town centers. Issues like train strikes and others may have had a part in this. So people are not necessarily opting to come into Manchester. They might be spending in their local areas. That's probably what explains that. And then there is another phenomenon to contend with as well, which is the change in the nature of work, or how we are working now, working patterns. And what I hear anecdotally from many businesses is that work from home is predominant on Mondays and Fridays. And then commuting to the office seems to be taking place on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Now, if you look into behaviors, traditionally, if people were in the office on Fridays, then there is a very high possibility of after-work drink, after-work meal, etc. That is probably not taking place in Manchester at the moment. And if we are all based at our normal places of residence rather than the normal place of work, then that spend, the weekend spend, is probably redirected towards town centers. So that explains why GM South and GM North may have gained because of that hospitality increase in this quarter. But when it comes to export sales, again, the situation is quite different. Manchester Central is flat, big exporter of services, Manchester. GM North, we have seen that increase, again, could be could be related to some of the manufacturing or the other types of services that are based in the north, and then GM South has come down. We would usually expect GM South to actually gain when there is export activity because of the location of warehousing, logistics, the Manchester airport, etc. in that southern part of GM, but that's not what seems to be happening at the moment. So that's the QES demand data. Let's see whether we get any confirmation or evidence for these findings in national data, and as it happens, we do. So the latest monthly GDP data, sort of dissected by broad sector groups, and then the sectors, service sector, broken down by some of the subsectors within services. So what this is showing is, firstly, let's look at manufacturing, which is that solid green line. And as I was saying earlier, in the aftermath of the pandemic, so October, November, December 2020, and then the first quarter of 2021, manufacturing was looking quite good. There started happening a slow decline in manufacturing, and that's what we have seen in the national data. So between that period, the first quarter of 2021, and now we've seen that line go steadily down. So there is not significant expansion of manufacturing nationally either, which reconfirms what we have seen in the QES. The dotted green line is construction, and as you can see that, the sudden sharp fall in construction activity during the pandemic, but then that is a line, that the dotted green line is growing, based on the new orders data. That is absolutely accurate. Then we have also seen that slight quarterly increase in services. But that orange line there is the overall economy. And this is what I was saying earlier. So if we compare October 2019, which is here, slightly above 100, and October 2022, we are at exactly the same spot. So the economy has not grown significantly in the last 36 months. Okay. So, and that is a cause for concern. The COVID pandemic has no doubt had an impact on that, but then Brexit has probably contributed to that as well. So, that's a unique UK challenge. And when we split the service sector, so the dark gray line, the black line there, into the subcomponents within services, this is very interesting. Because we see retail, the long-term picture for retail, despite that quarterly increase, is one of slight decline. That should again come as no surprise, because when we compare inflation with with what is happening on retail sales, the data shows that we are buying about 12% less than what we used to buy about 15 to 18 months ago, but we are paying about 13% more than what we used to pay, right? So we are buying less, paying more for the privilege, okay? And that is a direct consequence of inflation and imported inflation. Hospitality, hugely volatile, especially during COVID, but then, it's looking better now. And then the other services, the B2B services, are fairly stable. And so when I'm speaking to a couple of hospitality businesses, and their big concern is this. We've seen the sudden increase in this quarter, as you would expect, the lead up to the festive season. What does that then mean for the first quarter of 2023? Are we going to see an equally sharp fall? And that, unfortunately, may be the case, ladies and gentlemen, because there is a very high chance that consumer spending is going to slow down after Christmas. And if that happens, then we won't see that impetus for the B2C services sectors. And so there is a possibility that the first quarter of 2023 will be a bit worse than the current quarter. We'll deal with that when we come to the economic forecasts. So going on to some of the other measures, I think I may have skipped a slide. Yes. Cash flow. And this is probably the most important economic indicator for business performance. And as I have said before, although demand measures showed a significant improvement, that a rebound from COVID was marked in demand data, not necessarily in cash flow positions. So cash flow positions still remain weak. And so here is a big concern that we should have, and that is, again, speaking to hospitality businesses, some of them have said, we are actually keeping premises open despite the high cost because we do not want to miss out on the festive season, right? So they want turnover, they want revenue, and they want cash to sustain the spend. But if cash reserves are low and we see a decrease in consumer spending, how long can some of the worst affected businesses actually continue to invest and pour cash in? And will those businesses then remain viable perhaps this time next year? If that, and a lot of that depends on the first 3 to 6 months of 2023. If we see a cooling off in energy prices, some indicators that would happen based on this morning's inflation data release, that is exactly what we need. And we need to, there was one thing we can't do. We can't dictator-proof energy costs, can we? So we do need to see that improvement in cash flow and that reduction in price pressures. And the picture for cash flow is similar in the case of all three sectors. So manufacturing, services, and construction, all reporting sort of negative cash flow. Now, the one thing I should have mentioned earlier is these numbers that we see in the QES are reported as balances. So it's the difference between the proportion of the positive responses to a question and the negative responses to a question. So when any of the data points are below 0, what that means is that a much higher number of businesses have chosen the negative answer than those businesses that have chosen the positive answer. So 0 is actually a significant concern for us because there are more and more businesses that are under stress. And that is, again, what we are seeing elsewhere in the economy as well. So cash flow positions are looking difficult at the moment and have looked difficult for quite some quarters now. And so the question then is, well, we have an uncertain outlook. We have cash flow pressures. There are some concerns around demand in the coming quarter. What does that mean for a business confidence? And there is always a divergence between business confidence on turnover, so the optimism or the pessimism that the business can maintain revenues, versus the optimism that businesses can maintain margins or profitability. It's always a difference, as you would expect. And so on the turnover confidence, again, we've seen that decline, some stabilization, except in the case of services. So construction, again, turnover, probably there is some concern about what the future pipeline is going to be in construction. And there is always, there was this big program that Boris Johnson announced in the 2019 elections. And I remember QES 2019, which was on the day the election results came in. And we were saying, okay, maybe we have stability now. What a big mistake that was. That we were probably going to have a government deliver on leveling up, and you know what that happened with that. I distinctly remember that 3 years ago. Boy, what a different world we live in now. And so, we haven't seen further increase in that turnover confidence, and that's probably because of all of the other concerns in the economy. But when it comes to the optimism that profits or margins can be maintained, it's actually a worse picture. All three sectors are either very close to 0 or below 0 in the case of manufacturing. And so, that again is cause for concern, because what this means is that in an uncertain environment, would you invest? Would we see business investment grow? Probably not. And again, if the economy is reliant on B2C, i.e. consumer spending, and if consumer spending slows down, business investment does not necessarily pick up to compensate for consumer spending, then the outlook for the economy is going to be weaker. So that's on confidence. Again, backed up by other measures such as capacity utilization. Capacity utilization, overall across the economy is below 60%. The highest was in actually Q3 2022, when it was just above 60%. We would like it to be around 80% or so that there is actually no underutilization of available capacity, but there is also flex. 95% capacity is probably not great. Yeah, as you will know. A situation that is sort of a different picture for different sectors. Construction, and in times of normal relative to now, normal activity, we have seen construction capacity utilization on the higher side. Again, that could be because of issues like skills, because the shortage of labor in construction has been pronounced for quite some years. So capacity utilization tends to be on the higher side, and manufacturing has been higher. But there are two things to read into this. One is that overall capacity utilization is lower than optimum. And number two, when there is an improvement in the economy, how quickly can we ramp up, especially if capacity is around the human resource element. And that's what happened in the post-COVID. Lots of businesses let people go in the worst affected sectors. And so when demand returned, we were faced with a massive skill shortage and couldn't recruit fast enough. So that's on capacity utilization. Again, quite an important macroeconomic indicator. And let me end with even better news on the economic forecasts before I go into the local skills improvement plans. Okay, so for the current quarter, the consensus forecast is at about 0.5% decline. So that's on the back of the 0.2% in the third quarter. The consensus forecast is about 0.5%. But the downside scenario is 1%. But based on the service sector performance that we have seen, and I really wish the England team had progressed further, not just for the sporting achievement, but also for the economic contribution that they make. I expect the real figure which we'll get around February to be closer to the upside scenario of about 0.4%, 0.5%, rather than the minus 1%, which is the downside scenario. So I expect it to be 0.5 or even better when we do get the figures. The consensus for 2022 annual GDP growth is about 3.5%, between 3.5 to 4%. But the OECD estimates that the UK GDP could be as high as 4.4% in 2022. And here is something interesting that happened very recently and very quietly. The GDP numbers for 2021 were revised down. So if we do have some growth in 2022, you're obviously going to see a slightly higher percentage, aren't you? Because you're starting from a lower base than we expected we would. And this is very interesting. 12 months down the line, what do you find to either revise GDP growth down or up? 3.5 to 4% seems realistic. But then, when we enter 2023, UK is expected to be amongst the worst performing advanced economy. The only country that is going to perform worse is Russia, no doubt. And Germany is not far away, but that is primarily because of the reliance Germany has on Russian gas and oil. That's what is affecting Germany significantly. I think their gas storage is now just below 50% because of the cold snap. And don't want it to be below 50% in winter. And then there is a concern about how quickly can it be stocked up for the next winter, especially if we have serious disruption from Russia. Okay, so world GDP is expected to grow in 2023 by just below 2%. But as I said, the concern for us here in the UK is that it's going to be one of the worst performing economies. And we have to look at Brexit. We have to look at the economic consequences of Brexit and see whether this is what we want for the long term. Okay. Inflation is probably at its peak. We had a 0.4 percentage point reduction this morning. So from 11.1, it has gone down to 10.7. It is probably an indication that 11% mark is probably the peak. There might be an increase in the first quarter of 2023. Again, if we see lots of spending in this quarter at higher rates, then you might expect inflation to go up ever so slightly, or probably stay the same for some more time. But in the second half of 2023, inflation will come down. The headline CPI rate will come down. But please do remember, if we get a 2% or a 3% or a 5% next year, it's 2, 3, or 5% on top of what we have now. Right? So it's not that inflation has gone down, the headline rate of inflation has gone down, but that is because we are starting from a very high base in this year, and that's something to remember. And so the Bank of England in base rate, the base interest rate has been put up. This time last year, I think it was 0.1%, if I'm not mistaken. It's now 3%. Expected to go up to 3.5% tomorrow. The consensus is up 0.5 percentage points increase rather than a 0.75. But again, in the second half of 2023, I expect interest rates to stabilize and then start coming down. So in the short term, then the concern is, what does that mean for mortgage payments? What does that mean for business investment, especially if the financing costs are on the higher side? Okay. And then we also have the uncertain impact of public spending cuts. Some cuts were announced in the autumn statement. Some have been pushed into the long grass to be picked up again in 2024. Maybe even after the elections in 2024-25. So we do have some uncertainty around that situation as well. Okay, I'll skip my next slide because it's just a very quick summary, and then go straight into the findings of the local skills improvement plan. And let me just give a shout out to my team working exclusively on the LSIP. So Samantha, Limsey, Swastika, and Adya, 4 of them working on LSIPs. And also Callum, never forget Callum, man of many talents, including video streaming, research, code writing. Can't find a better person to do that. Okay, so the research that we have conducted so far, and some of these findings are really interesting. We have done a couple of things. We have done a survey, the LSIP survey, got about 460 responses to analyze. So the initial findings are based on that analysis, but also some of the analysis of national data sets. So, some of the findings reconfirm certain things that we know about the labor market and about skills shortages. For example, that there is a lot of local variability in both the skills needs, but also the supply, the workforce, and the qualification levels, the skills levels, etc. of the workforce. There is significant local variability from one part of GM to another. And I do have a couple of slides which I will not go into, because we're better off hearing from the panel. So that's important. But there is another interesting finding, which was that when employers talk about skills shortages, the data that we have gathered shows that you're probably relating it to the recruitment process rather than skills deficits within the current workforce. So which means the ability or the intention to offer training for upskilling or reskilling is on the lower side. Okay? Because there seems to be that natural association of skill shortages with candidates that we are trying to recruit. And as a result, training is lagging behind. And we also, face a soft skills barrier. This has come up again and again. Businesses, many of you telling us that sometimes it's the hard practical skills and the qualifications, but sometimes it is the soft skills that seems to be in shortage. And just one more point to make on the variability. So the analysis of qualification data amongst the workforce, again, unsurprisingly, shows that areas with a higher proportion of people with either the higher level qualifications, so NVQ level 4 and above, and also areas with a very low number of people with no qualifications tend to have higher employment rates. Trafford, Wigan being 2 examples, and also tend to have higher than average weekly earnings as well. Okay. So that sort of makes the very strong connection between the skills level of the general workforce, their ability to earn, so the high skill, high wage, and also just the labor market participation in terms of employment opportunities. So, we are trying to make the point that yes, skills levels need to be upgraded across GM. There is no doubt about that. But we need to address the local variability from one part of GM to another. So I'm just going to stop there, hand over to Chris.
Okay, thank you very much, Subra. If we could just show our appreciation. I would say that applause is probably for the style of presentation and knowledge shown rather than the content, which in some cases is increasingly worrying, to be quite honest. Don't want to put too much of a downer on that, but there are some significant challenges coming up. So I'd just like to ask our panellists now to join us. First of all, Jane Garner from Ingis, if you'd just like to take a seat, and Jill Bottomley from HR Department. And if you can have some, we'll give you a bit of a rest, Subra, for a few minutes. We need the microphone. There we go. That should be okay. So, Jill, if you just introduce yourself first of all, a little bit about what you're doing, a little bit about the company, and also what you're seeing in some of the areas around skills at the present moment in time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for asking me here. I'm Jill Bottomley. I'm owner-director of the HR department at Trafford and Warrington. It's one of the national franchises, and what we do is provide outsourced human resources for small and medium-sized businesses. I'm also sit on 2 education boards on a voluntary basis of Trafford College Group and Hamden Education Trust. So quite passionate about the whole skills piece. We see the employment. I could spend all day talking about a lot of the issues there. But people have often said to me over the years, we're a barometer for what's going on, because we really deal with those small businesses and medium-sized companies. We've started the redundancy processes. We've just made 3 directors of a 40-year-old family business redundant, completely contracted the company. Interestingly, in the wholesale sector, the slides indicated it. We see the skills issue. We see the many businesses who haven't invested in software or they have invested, but they've not utilised or been efficient. And there's lots of workarounds happening. And now, as things are getting tight, companies are realising it's not good enough. So there's a whole factor of things that we are seeing, but certainly investment in skills is critical in the workplace.
And when you say that, is it across all sectors that you deal with, or is it just in particular ones that sort of stand out as?
Yeah, we deal across all sectors. There is some really good news. Some of our clients, probably in niche markets, are flying. Some areas of manufacturing are as well, which is interesting. But a lot of those have already started to adapt. So one thing I'd like to get across is we have in this country a way of just having everybody on contracts of employment for X hours per week. There's no reason why we need to have people on working 37, 40 hours a week. And we could be more creative with working hours, have longer reconciliation periods, match work to people in terms of time. That enables more flexibility as well. So there's an opportunity, whilst things are hard and tough, we can be more creative. That can be win-win. So the skills is software, it's manufacturing, some not very big training, but it's about managing people through the change.
Okay, thanks very much, Jill. And now to introduce Jen. Jen, could you say a little bit about your role and also what Ingis is up to in Greater Manchester?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jane Garner. I'm the Head of Integration for Ingis. Ingis deliver 4 large-scale employability programs in Greater Manchester. So a massive range of different people and different circumstances. But we work with unemployed people to support them into sustainable employment. That's the whole aim of the game. We do that in partnership with the Department for Work and Pensions and with the Combined Authority. But just to maybe give you a bit of an idea of the scale, so across Greater Manchester, at peak this year, we had over 20,000 unemployed people on programmes at any given moment, so really like large scale. I'm not a data expert, that's like these guys, so hopefully I can bring to life maybe some of the challenges that unemployed people are facing now and some of the real things that are very difficult and becoming more difficult for those people that are searching for work and are looking for work, and also for any businesses here that want to invoke their corporate social responsibilities maybe in a bit of a different way, or you've made social value pledges. I'd love to talk to you because we really want to give people who are disadvantaged in the labour market a really great opportunity to find work that they can thrive in. And in terms of our work with the Chamber, we're members of the Chamber, but also really want to support the local skills improvement plan, and hopefully can provide information to the team here that talks about the kind of skills and support that unemployed people might really require to help them to get a foot in the door of employment.
Thanks, Jane, for that. And again, some really good work going on, and I would say that probably a lot of people in the audience are unaware of what is actually going on. Just come back to that point around what we hear from employers, whereby they can't get hold of people with the right skills. From the point of view of the people that you're dealing with, unemployed, trying to get back into the workplace, what does that look like in reality from their perspective? Is it a case of they've not got the skills, or they've never had opportunity to get the skills?
Look, they're, but for the grace of God, like the people that are on our caseloads now could be anybody in this room and me. So touch wood, we're in a really fortunate position that we're not experiencing those problems at the moment. So the people and their backgrounds are as varied as you can possibly imagine, So there's people that come from really senior positions that maybe through the pandemic, and I met somebody this week who during the pandemic had been looking after elderly parents and had held a really senior position in the past, and has since struggled to get back into work. So you have a huge range of circumstances. Broadly, and maybe if you looked at some of those caseloads, for the programmes that support people who are long-term unemployed or have health conditions and disabilities, about half of that caseload is aged over 45, so we have a more mature caseload. We might expect that would bring with it people who've got, loads of employment experience, different skills, that kind of thing. But that gap out of work shows us that people feel that their skills and qualifications may be out of date and less relevant. Some of the main barriers are mental health and physical health. They're the key things that are part of the challenge that we need to overcome and support people with.
And a little bit of that is what somebody was describing there, right? Sometimes that progression within work as well, isn't it? From the point of view of, my skills are quickly out of date type scenario. For people out of work, it probably feels twice as bad. But for people in work, there are problems like that. Jill, do you pick any of that up when you're dealing with your clients about their approach to training? Is it second to recruitment, or, what does that look like on the ground?
Yeah, training is, as I was saying before, I think the issue to be tackled next year. Many smaller type businesses have traditional ways in terms of recruiting and developing people by showing them on the job. Where the issues come in that we see is, again, when new technology, with the advancement of AI and augmentation, people are going to have to stop working with the technologies, and that's where the training doesn't go far enough, and often may not have the skills to know how to actually effect change. For example, 2 examples. Last week, a client that's domiciliary care, so individuals lone working going into individual homes to do caring. Those individuals now need to start using PDAs. The future's about data and analytics and performance to look at the productivity. But where you have somebody who is fearful of using that technology, who resists using that technology, but then you haven't got managers who know how to help people to do it. And whilst they might go on a training course, that training isn't going far enough. Soft skills, really interesting point, because the big thing at the moment is management training skills, and especially in empathy. And, what we find in smaller businesses, people finish the job on a Friday because they're good at what they do, and then on a Monday, they start to manage a team of people. Now, we wouldn't buy big pieces of equipment, technical equipment, and say, there you go, crack on. We train on it, but we don't train managers and people, and that's really where the training, I feel, comes down. And the second one was in a retail environment. We've paid a lot of money, invested in this fantastic whizzy till, yet nobody knows how to use it or wants to know how to use it because they just want to sell what's being sold. So yeah, training is big, but the opportunities are there.
And Jen, from the point of view of the cases that you see and deal with, are there any sort of particular areas of demand that you're picking up that type of skills are, I'll use the phrase, more important or become more of a priority? There we go. We're having a bit of a light show as well. There we go.
I feel like it's like the warning. You've only got 5
I was just going to say, it's that time already, is it, Lucy? That's okay. I've completely lost my train of thought. Priorities around skills. I was thinking about electricians for some minute. Thinking around, where you can see the most demand being in the future. And how easy is it then to sort of point people in that direction? Because obviously, one of the things we've identified through the LSIP and through the team here is that with a lot of those technological changes, jobs that currently exist will probably not exist in the next few years. We're not talking decades. In the next few years, there'll be a lot of change. So how easy is it to sort of blend that into the important work that you're doing? Because one thing to get people back into work, but obviously then it's the sustainability of that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, short-term employment, it doesn't mean anything to us. We are targeted, our programs are targeted on people staying in work. Sustainable work really is all that matters to us. So opportunities for people to grow and develop in their role are hugely important, and finding something that people want to commit to, lasting work that they can stay and grow in, that's great. I get the point around soft skills, and I think some of this is pandemic based, like some of our programs for younger people. We can really see that kind of gap in development of social skills and like communication has had quite a lot of impact, and particularly for people's willingness to take up skills. So I think, there's probably a bit of a pandemic hangover in that. But ease of access actually is great. Greater Manchester has got some amazing networks and that kind of structure that provides people in Greater Manchester with really great opportunities. So the adult education budget, I've spotted a back to work, hi. Like this massive network of skills provision that means that if you're unemployed at the moment, you will probably qualify for the right, opportunities to upskill. The call out really for employers is to work with and really closely with us and skills providers, because we can develop and adapt curriculum and courses for people who are unemployed to gear them up for the opportunities that you have available. Soft skills is a biggie, but I think everything else really needs to be employer-led. We could put 50 people tomorrow through a customer service level 2 qualification. If that's not what you need in the business, that's kind of pointless. We want to make sure that skills is really driven by the labour market.
That's almost a perfect advert for the work we're doing on the local skills improvement plan, because that's what it's all about. And it's about identifying, where those skills are, what the priorities are, what's needed. Obviously, you've got issues now, but what's needed more importantly in the future. Subra, you've had a breather now for 5 minutes or so we'll bring you back into the fray. I'm going to open it up to the floor in a minute for questions, so please have a think about that for anyone of our fantastic panel here. I just want to ask you a question. I'm going to throw this one on you. In the past, for example, if we go back to previous recessions, 2008, etc., construction sector was always one of those that was first in and first out of any recession. Are we seeing a change where perhaps it might be a different sector now that leads on these things, or is it just such a confused picture? It's actually very difficult to say. There you go, that's one for a Wednesday morning.
Okay, so I would say construction sector in normal recessions is the first to be impacted, but rather than the first out, it would be the last out. So it would be the last to recover post-recession. The COVID pandemic induced recession was actually quite different, because the construction sector did see that sudden sharp fall. But again, it was one of the first sectors that the government said can resume working. And so we saw activity recovering in the construction sector. So I guess this recession that we are walking into is probably going to be different. Again, I don't know how much the construction sector will be impacted. And I say that for two reasons. One is the pipeline of work. We've seen new orders. The pipeline of work is certainly lower than it was maybe a year or 2 years ago, but nonetheless, there is some pipeline of work. And the second is that there is actually a lot of investment. And we were at an event yesterday where one of the speakers said they are potentially sitting on, investors are sitting on a pile of about 1.5 billion, if I got my numbers correct, actually wanting to invest primarily on the property sector in the UK. Right? What are they waiting for? They're waiting because the economic outlook at the moment is uncertain. And if they see a reduction in the value of the pound, then some of the assets are going to become a bit cheaper as well. So there is some investment that is waiting to happen in the construction system. I think the risks are, how do you manage that economic uncertainty to trigger investment? Because a lot of foreign directed investment is directed towards property sector, isn't it? I mean, we've seen that in Manchester with Airport City, Middlewood Locks. But then I recently learned that the Battersea Power Project, that entire redevelopment was apparently financed with Malaysian money rather than with UK investment. So there is a lot of foreign directed investment coming into property. The other challenge is if you can give certainty, we can unlock investment, but then you're immediately faced with issues around the availability of materials, the high price of materials, the shortage of skills, etc. And when I speak to civil servants, there's some lack of awareness because they said, well, why can't the construction sector stock up inventory? And I was saying, but where do they stock up inventory? It is not a sector that actually has got lots of facilities to actually store things. The way you store things on site. And so you can't actually stock up material for 1 year. And moreover, every project can be different. Yeah. So that, I think, is going to be a bit of a challenge for some time coming.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Anybody got any questions that want to ask the panel? Just give you the microphone. Just say who you are, where you're from. That's great. And if there's anybody you want to address it to.
Hi there, Derek Barrett. I'm from New Level Results. I was curious, you mentioned the capacity utilisation across the economy was 60%. And I was just wondering, what would actually bring that up to, say, 70 or 80%? Because I'm just not quite clear on what you're measuring.
Okay. So, first of all, when we talk of capacity utilization, in the case of a production facility, a manufacturing facility, we are probably referring to how much time perhaps the machinery is being used for, and so on. That could be one way. In the case of a service sector business, it is probably directly related to billable hours. Okay. So again, how many hours are people there working on billable activity? Those are just two examples. What would increase capacity utilization? I think it would be higher demand. So when we see demand pick up, you obviously have more billable hours to service or more products to produce to meet demand, and that would probably see capacity utilization go up within a business. It is not necessarily a productivity measure, no. Yeah, it's a very business-focused measure.
Excellent, thank you. Any more questions from anybody? Yeah, Helen.
Hi, Helen from Peak Translations. A question about the training you were mentioning, possibly to Jill, I don't know. Obviously, we've seen that companies are feeling the pinch as well. So as an employer, I wondered whether you've got any advice or tips for people to actually find cost-effective training for their staff if they've got limited or perhaps no budget at all to be able to put towards training.
Great question. And I don't know how many people are aware, but things like the Growth Company, Business Growth Hub, they've got a lot of fully funded training. We run a number of programs on that as well. I think we were talking before, Jane, about. So there is funded training out there. It's businesses don't always know what they don't know and are busy doing the doings. That there's Skills for Growth, there's a platform there. So there's actually a lot of funded support available to tap into, whether it's in marketing, innovation, in HR, in finance. So, yeah, and I think it's just identifying what the skills needs are of employees. And I know it's difficult. I'm a small business owner myself. And, you know, you're keeping going and you're trying to get more work. And it's like, how do you actually keep ahead of what do we need to keep moving forward? And where are our skills gaps? But yes, there's funding there.
We've just recently started a new scheme as well in partnership with colleagues over in East Lancashire, SME apprenticeships as well. So for certain sectors, there's all these new sort of schemes coming through and whatever. So it is out there, but you've sometimes got to know where to look or who to ask, and that's part of the issue, isn't it? Really, yeah. with a lot of these.
If I can just say, there's some new funding coming online from January. I can't remember what it's called now. There's that many terminologies, but there's 3 hours of funded training, and there's a lot of providers in the region that will be doing it in all aspects.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Helen. Okay, time for one more. We're just reaching 10 o'clock. The lights will be flickering on and off for real this time. Terry.
Hi, Terry Simmons from eLearning Plus. We specialise in on learning, development and training. I was interested in the bit that talked about people finding skills are either looking to recruitment to get those skills when they could be developing their own people for those kind of skills. So just interested in some comments around that bit, because that was quite interesting for me.
Who wants that one?
Then you can quickly. I think it's identifying the training need. It's back to basics in terms of where are we going, what have we got, what do we need to do. And I think over the next couple of years we will see the need, because of the recruitment challenge, that we're going to have to grow from within. And, you know, using platforms like yours, Terry, in terms of e-learning and a whole blended form of training, what will be needed.
Sure, I agree with that, but I just think, you know, again, this is my shameless plug. If you are looking to recruit and have particular need for that role or need for a particular skill, then please shout me, because it might be that if that is something that isn't currently available through our candidates, that we might be able to work with skills provision to get that in place. So that was the shameless plug out of the way. But yeah, I completely agree, completely understand where you're coming from, that there is, I think from the data sort of showing that there is either that soft skill lack or baseline skill lack, maybe in candidates, but I feel utterly confident that we've probably got the right candidates for a range of positions.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll close proceedings down. At that point, we just crept over 10 o'clock. But if we just show our appreciation, please, to our panel, to Jane, Jill, and obviously Subra. So that's quarter 4 done. It'll soon be quarter 1 survey, probably middle of January, is it, Subra, when it soon comes round. But it's so important, and again, just to re-emphasise the message, all this information you've heard today has come straight from yourselves, straight from businesses, and it's so important that we continue to do that. And if you get the survey end of January, I think it is, the next one is mid-Feb, yeah, something like that. It'll soon be here. Please share it. Doesn't matter if the chamber members are not bothered. Just get businesses to fill it in, because it is so important, and we can start to do an awful lot with it, and especially around the local skills improvement plan as well. Please take part in that, take an active role in that, because the more you tell us, the more we can get stuff changed, and working with fantastic people that we've got here on the panel and a lot of other people that we work with as well. So, on that, all I've got to say is thank you so much for coming here today, for spending an hour or so, an hour and a half of your time. Hopefully it's been informative. I would say it's positive in some respect. No, I can't do that. What I will say, though, is I'd like to wish you all compliments of the season. Have a great Christmas. Have a fantastic New Year. Let's make it better than what we think it might look like, because that's within our power. That's within our gift to actually do that. We've got to talk ourselves out of this stuff sometimes, but the numbers don't lie. It is going to be challenging. but there's some fantastic businesses, there's some fantastic people in Greater Manchester. It's my privilege to work with a lot of them day in, day out. Please continue to do what you are doing. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a safe journey back to work, home, or wherever it is you're going next. Thank you.